Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Mr. Clerk. Mr. Speaker, no further amendments. Representative Reeves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HB 855, or Senate Bill 799, ensures that the primary election format is extended to county-level partisan office nominations rather than party conventions. And while statewide and U.S. congressional offices were already required to use primaries, this bill extends that same standard of voter participation and transparency to key local offices. It is important to note that certain counties are grandfathered in to continue their use of a party convention if they desire to do so. And this expresses a legislative intent for the primary format for party nominations while recognizing current local practices. And with that, I renew my motion, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Reeves renews the motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Cepicky, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the sponsor, under caucuses and conventions, have you ever chaired one yourself?
Representative Reeves.
Representative, I have not.
Representative Cepicky.
Thank you for that answer. Under caucuses or conventions, you're talking about the local elections, our mayors, our county commissions, our school boards, our local judges. Is that correct?
Representative Reeves.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Representative Cepicky.
If a local party now is required to call for a primary, who pays for that primary?
Representative Reeves.
Representative, nothing actually changes. If they use a primary today, they will use a primary going forward. And if they currently use a caucus, they are allowed to continue to do that as well.
Representative Cepicky.
Just to clarify, my question was, if there is a primary called for, who has to pay for that? Does the state pay for that primary?
Representative Reeves.
My understanding is in a presidential year, the state reimburses the county for that, and in the intervening years, it's the county's responsibility.
Representative Cepicky.
Okay, hold on. You just said that in a county primary, that the state reimburses the locals for that?
Representative Reeves.
That is my understanding during presidential years, sir.
Representative Cepicky.
Okay, in the off-presidential year, who pays for it?
Representative Reeves.
I have already answered that question for you, so I will say it a little slower.
Just back for HPY.
Representative Reeves.
The county is responsible for that charge, and right now, almost every county has bought into that system.
Representative Cepicky.
Words have power, and that's not what you said to begin with. You said the state reimbursed them for that. In the off-election year, the county's responsible for that charge. The county commission has to be informed by the local party that they're going to call for that primary, and then the election commissioner of the local party has to go to the county commission and get the county commission to appropriate those funds moving forward. So, here's my last. Are you aware that the state executive committee, aside from 2 votes, almost unanimously passed legislation opposing your legislation? Do you have any comments on that?
Representative Reeves.
Well, I'll go back 1 minute. I wish I had tape to replay, because I think I did note exactly what I said in the beginning was that during presidential years, the state reimbursed the county, and in off-cycle years, it was the county's responsibility. I am aware that the Republican SEC met over the weekend, and they're not a fan of the bill.
Representative Cepicky.
So your comment is you don't care, or you support the state executive committee's position, or you want to ignore their position?
Representative Reeves.
I appreciate you asking me what my comment is on that. My comment is I will stand with the voters. I will stand with the mom and the dad who can't make it to a caucus, and I will stand with the military member who is on active duty overseas defending our right to vote, but cannot vote in a caucus. And I will stand with the emergency healthcare workers who are on duty that night. And I will stand with the pregnant mother giving birth the night of that caucus. I will stand, and I hope Tennessee stands with me on that.
Representative Cepicky.
Such an house.
If this bill passes, do you support closing the primaries?
That's outside the topic. We're on caucus. Representative Cepicky, this is the primary of the caucus. It's not about the voting, the people in the caucus. It's an election. It's a different bill. Closed primaries are a different bill. Representative Cepicky.
Can we ask the clerk on that?
Nope.
Okay, fair enough.
Right.
Representative Cepicky.
No, I'll leave it alone. Thank you, Mr. Thank you.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative from Middle Tennessee asked most of my questions, so I won't spend a lot of time with this. Just one quick question for you, sponsor. Appreciate your effort on this. But after you saw the responses from the local GOPs, did it assuage your mind on this bill at all?
Representative Reeves.
No, I'm confident, Representative, that this bill is the right thing for the voters of Tennessee, although you have prompted something in my mind. Let me cover what HB55 does not do, since I've covered what it does do, and this is relevant because I have heard through some state GOPs some incorrect things about what this bill does. It does not require nonpartisan races like in counties with a nonpartisan county elected official. Some do have nonpartisan. In municipal offices, it does not change anything with respect to those. It does not add new bureaucracy. It does not add new costs in counties that are already using primaries, which is almost all of them. And those that are not currently using primaries are grandfathered in. And last thing on that, it does not require local party chairs or local party officers to be nominated through a primary. I have heard that percolating through. It's just simply not true. That's not what this bill does. There's some confusion and rumors to the contrary. This bill does not impact party officers.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks for that great answer. Again, just to follow up on that, no movement at all when you saw that most of the GOP SEC members had an opposition to that. That'd be my last question, so thank you.
Representative Reeves.
Yeah, no, I will stand with voters over party insiders any day of the week.
Wow.
Representative Bulso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill, not because my disagreement with my good friend and colleague from Williamson County is slight, but because it's significant. Primaries, yes. Open primaries, no. The problem we have in Tennessee right now is that we have no way of allowing our state political parties, including the state GOP, to close primaries to make sure that everyone voting in a party's primary is actually a member or someone who affiliates with that party. And that causes a legal concern and it causes a practical concern. Let me first address the legal concern. Where you have a requirement that a state party use a primary system of voting, yet you have no means by which to close the primary, you are violating the party's right of freedom of association under the First Amendment. Let me read to you what one of the most recent cases has said on this point. This is the District Court of Idaho applying our Supreme Court precedent, where in Idaho, the state legislature passed a bill very similar to SB 799. And in Idaho, as in Tennessee, there was a problem with crossover voting. That is, independents voting in a Republican primary and members of other parties voting in that primary. Here is what the district court said in the Ysursa case, quote, because the open primary permits substantial numbers of independent voters as well as all voters associated with other political parties to, quote, cross over, close quote, and participate in the Republican Party's selection of its nominees, the court concludes that by mandating such a nomination process, the state violates the party's constitutionally guaranteed right to freedom of association, close quote. That is the precise bill that we are about to vote on, ladies and gentlemen. That is the legal concern, that this bill, given our current system of open primaries in Tennessee, is simply contrary to a private group's freedom of association under the First Amendment. The second point is a practical one. We have this very problem in Williamson County, as I'm sure occurs in many of the other 95 counties across the state. In just this last presidential primary, in March of 2024, we had just over 36,000 voters in the Republican primary. Of that number, more than 10%, slightly over 3,900, were Democrats. That is, they were folks who had recently voted in a Democratic primary. More than 10% in March of 2024. And why that is significant, members, is because when we look at the Ysursa case that I mentioned a moment ago from Iowa, it found, and I quote, even if we use the most conservative estimate of 10% of crossover voting, with only a small number of partisan raiders, the effects can be devastating to a party. So the federal district court in Idaho found that because there was evidence of more than 10% crossover voting, the statute was unconstitutional. We have that in my home county of Williamson County. And we had another occasion just 2 years earlier in 2022, where we had an election where 245 Democrats crossed over to vote in our Republican primary, and we had one county commissioner lose his seat by 11 votes. So I say, members, primaries, yes, it is the superior way of broadening the base and allowing most voters to participate. But open primaries, no. We simply cannot require that our state political parties use a primary system without giving them some means to close those primaries. Please vote no.
Representative Reeves.
Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Martin of Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise to remind this body that Tennessee is ranked #1 in election integrity. And it's important to remember that, because as we think about the primaries and how that they are conducted across the state, that we have a fair way that things are done. And when you take that away from the Election Commission, you take that away from the Secretary of State, you take that away from those people that are looking at that, I wonder what we're going to have. I would remind you, as the representative from Williamson County so eloquently put, I too am for primaries. And I am for primaries that mean something, then I'm for closed primaries, but that's not what this bill's about. This bill is about not changing one thing for the counties that choose to do it by caucus for the last couple of years. But it's saying that we're going to continue to have voting by primaries for those of us that are. And let me tell you why that's important. Last primary that we had in Hamilton County, there was 32,419 votes. 2 years before that, there was 40,709 votes in the Republican primary. We don't have a building big enough to get that kind of crowd into a building
We don't have,
to have a caucus.
because that's more important.
And let me remind you of this, to my Republican colleagues especially. We are the party of enfranchising, not disenfranchising the voters.
My gosh.
And that's important to remember that. You think about this great country. when it was founded, you had to go to a courthouse on a certain day at a certain time and verbally say who you were voting for. But I want you to know something. On those days, they wouldn't have let me vote because I didn't own a whole lot of, I don't own a whole lot of land. I think I own a half an acre. That's about it. But we've been marching towards a more perfect union. And they let poor white people vote around the early part of the 19th century. And as we marched towards a more perfect union, we included African Americans. And then as we marched forward into the 20th century, we said to women, you too have the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. And then we said to those who are 18 defending our freedom in an army that you too have the right to vote. And so my question is this: why in the world would we want to reel that in, take that back and say we're going to limit this just to a group of people that can gather in a room or in a building at a certain time, and it's only limited to those people? And so I think it's one of those things that what we're saying is that we are for voting, we're for primaries, we're for many people choosing who our elected representative is going to be and who's going to represent us. It's not going to affect those that are in a caucus. And I benefited from a caucus at one time. But is what it's going to do, it's going to say that the counties that have primaries need to continue. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield.
Representative Reeves. Representative Reeves, pass. Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question's been called. Is there objection? I only heard two. We're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 799, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hard way out. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 25 nays, 2 present, not voting.
Senate Bill 799 have received a constitutional majority. Everybody declare pass. Without objection, the motion reconsider is tabled. Thought next bill, Mr. Clark.
Stop it.
God.